Hello, I'm the Dark Master, and welcome back to the Kirby Right Back at You Retrospective. In today's video, we should be reviewing Episode 76, Fossil Fools Part 2, or as it's known in the Japanese original, Dream of Dinosaur Paradise Volume 2, or Dream Dino Heaven Part 2, depending on which translation you use. So this episode was first released on March 29th, 2003 in Japan, while the English dub done by the infamous 4Kids was not released until October 16th, 2004 in North America. This is the second part of a two-parter. As such, I highly recommend you watch my review of Part 1 for full context of the events of this episode. Sure, this episode has a brief recap at the start. I still think it would be better if you saw that video first before watching this. I will also afterwards be reviewing this episode on its own merits, talk about the two-parter as a whole, and then talk about Season 3 at the end of this video, so yeah. But enough of this sort of pre-review dawdling. Let us start with the review proper. The episode starts, as I mentioned before, with a recap of the events of the first episode. It is also here where we see the first change between versions. In the Japanese original, there are additional scenes from the beginning of the episode, like with Dee mining the side of the cliff for fossils. In the English dub, likely in order to better fit within the US airing schedule, time slots, they were removed. Regardless of the footage, though, both versions have Tiff do a great job summarizing the events of Part 1 by explaining how the king got into a dino frenzy and ordered Dr. Moro from Enemy to help him bring them back for a dinosaur theme park. This is also the first time Tiff in Universe actually did the narration. 4Kids up to this point used an uncredited voice actor. Now it's much more in line with the Japanese original, as now someone in Universe, in this case Tiff, describes the events, which is what was the case in the Japanese original. Then we go to the jazzy intro. After the jazzy intro, we cut to Kirby and the others on a boat headed by Dee fleeing from the giant monster D-Rex, which, as you can tell by its name, is meant to be a hybrid between a Tyrannosaurus Rex and Dee. It is the first of what is collectively called Chimera dinosaurs in the Japanese original, though the collection doesn't have a name in the English dub. I think in order for this video to flow better, I'll talk about them as we meet them, but speaking of Japan, in that version, D-Rex's growls sound a lot like DDD. Instead, the English dub, they're just these sort of generic kaiju sounds. Kind of disappointing, but not super big of an issue, and it's honestly kind of a creepy beast, all things considered. We see him chase after the boat. Kawasaki remarks that perhaps they should have gone on the merry-go-round instead. Professor Kiro makes the pretty obvious observation that the dinosaur is indeed real, and D-Rex runs headfirst into a tree that nearly crushes the boat. Dee comments on how the dinosaur looks familiar to him, to which Escargoon says it must be due to it looking awful. Dee in turn hits him on the head and tells him to say what he really means, as Escargoon bluntly says it looks just like him. D-Rex continues to chase the boat, barely missing a bite as it dives into the river and continues the chase after them. Tiff points out how it's gaining on them, but the king says that they can't go any faster. They approach a tunnel. Kirby looks at D-Rex as it makes one last lunge before the boat gets into the tunnel and misses, as it helplessly tries to bite at them. The boat comes to a stop well inside as Dee and Kirby sigh, a breath of relief. Gus also sighs as Kawasaki says that they almost became chop suey. Tiff contemplates on what just happened as we see the mayor lambast Dee for putting them in such danger. Police Chief Bookham says that he should arrest them for, attempted assault. I'd like to note that his voice in this episode marks a change as, for unknown reasons, Andrew Scott Reynolds, who is most well known for his role in the 2011 musical The Book of Mormon, also who voices, Nightmare and Rick in the anime, as well as Marty from Pokemon, replaced the former voice actor of Bookham's, that being Jerry Lobozo, who also voiced Professor Curio, as well as Chuck Thorndike from Sonic X and Randy from The Slayers. It's not super notable, but it's still kind of an odd decision that I'd love to know the reasoning behind. Back to the plot, Escargoon counters by saying that he had no idea about the dinosaur, and the king points out that if they wanted to play the blame game, they shouldn't forget about Dr. Moro. Tiff then proclaims that he must have stolen the eggs while the group slept, with Tuff pointing out that he tricked them into making dino monsters. Dee is annoyed as he wished the guy to make real dinos, and Escargoon is just confused as Tiff explains to them that they were tricked, as he, probably took some DNA from the king. Escargoon as well then gets a flashback of Dr. Moreau taking blood from both the king and says that Dr. Moreau said that it was for a blood drive. Dee says that his arm hurt for 3 days after, while Tiff says that he tricked them into giving him DNA, which Tuff explains he mixed with the dinosaur DNA. Dee and Escargoon are confused, to which Professor Curio explains that DNA is the building blocks of life. Tiff then comes to the horrifying conclusion that he could make dinosaurs based off anyone. This causes the group to panic, but we see these sorts of strange syringe mosquito drone things that descend upon the group and, bite them, draining their blood. They bother the group before leaving, with Tiff advising that they leave as the king declares he'll tear Dr. Moreau limb from limb. As they exit the cave, they continue down the river out of the cave to a rather calm region. The king gets up to leave, saying that the cabbies are on their own. The sheriff points out how they can't just leave them here, as Kawasaki says it's his fault that they got stuck in here, so he should help them out. The king, however, dismisses this, saying that they're a bunch of slobs, taking up time. They pause, however, when they hear a sound. Tuff is worried as we see a large chimera dinosaur show up, Escargosaurus. Now, this creature is clearly modeled after a Stegosaurus most likely being the one in particular. It is also here that we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, he repeats the word Gesu a lot, which, doesn't really make much sense in English, so 4Kids changed it to him sounding like Escargoon's sighing. Indeed, in the Japanese original, this connection was so strong that the creature was called a Escargosaurus. Frankly, this is one of the few changes that 4Kids did in the series I think is an unqualified positive, as I don't really think him saying Gesu in English would really make any sense. Regardless, in both versions, it horrifies Dee and Escargoon. Tiff sensibly tells everyone to hide. Iroh, however, foolishly takes a photo which gets Escargosaurus' attention. Tiff tells him off, but it's too late and it approaches the group. It takes a half-hearted bite at the two goobers who barely dodge. It chuckles to itself before D-Rex shows up and starts attacking him. The group cheer on. Dee and Escargoon egotistically cheer on their respective dinosaurs. Tiff, however, the only one with common sense, tells them to use this chance to escape, and wisely they do so. However, as they leave, D-Rex and Escargosaurus decide to go after the poor people. As the two chase after the boat, D-Rex bites Escargosaurus' tail and flings him near the boat, causing it to capsize and leave its passengers set aground. D-Rex pursues them, and they all flee into the nearby woods, sadly getting split up as D-Rex, tears up the boat. Deity is seen running as Escargoon holds on to him for dear life, though the king doesn't want him to very much. Meanwhile, D-Rex and Escarsaurus growl at annoyance due to being blocked from following due to the thick jungle. We cut to the next night as we see Bookums and his wife going through the jungle, wandering kind of blindly. Buttercups is worried, but Bookham says he'll protect her. But this reassurance is cut short as the large footsteps of a chimera dinosaur that looks a lot like Bookums himself shows up. As you see the next change between versions, as well as a few interesting things to talk about. Firstly, in the Japanese original, it's called Borontosaurus, while in the English dub, it's called Bookhamsaurus. Now, it's pretty obvious based on the name in Japan and its greatly elongated neck that it's meant to be a sauropod, specifically Brachiosaurus from Jurassic Park. Interestingly, though, the specimen that inspired the design seen in a lot of paleoart toys in Jurassic Park itself is no longer thought to be of the genus. Instead, thanks to research done in 2009 by Michael B. Taylor, it was found that the African specimens represented an entirely separate genus called Giraffatitan. Now, to be fair, both look very similar to one another and both are generally thought to be somewhat related, plus Bookham's DNA has likely muddled any subtle differences between the two genera. Speaking of which, can I just point out how it's very interesting that this guy has a hat? Sure, I could have said the same with D-Rex, but I think this is the first one in many we'll see that it's pretty obvious. Now, you might say, well, perhaps Dr. Moro simply gave it to them. Now, ignoring how absurd that is for him, never mind the fact that it probably fall off, I'd like to point out that, later on in this episode, we're seeing that they are born with it. So it's sort of like a weird flesh growth. Kind of reminds me of those weird Thomas the Tank Engine animations, Sled 17 by Paul's Vids. But back to the plot. The mayor and his wife look up at the big beast as they realize what Tiff said about the hybrid dinosaurs was true. The conversation is cut short by one of the sheep who had managed to survive D-Rex's attack. The mayor, Len Blustergas, and his wife are overjoyed at this, and the mayor calls to it to come over. It tries to get there, but before it can arrive to them, it is eaten whole as the two are shocked as we see the chimera dinosaur responsible for such actions was none other than Lenosaurus, a hybrid between the mayor and a dinosaur. Ironic given that Len loves his sheep. Sadly, we don't actually know what kind of dinosaur this is meant to be. It's bigger than some of the later ones we'll see, as well as smaller than D-Rex, so I hypothesize maybe it's meant to be like a Torvosaurus, but really your opinion is about as good as mine. The two are horrified by the top hat mustached monster. It then notices them and chases the married couple away. Afterwards, we then cut to Mabel and Samo, who watch this unfold. It is here that we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, Samo says that if Mabel is scared, she can hold on to him, and she declines, pointing out how sweaty he is. In the English dub, it has him saying that she can make a diversion while he runs. I prefer the Japanese original as it seems less cowardly and more in line with what we know about Samo and his relationship with Mabel. They stop their conversation, though, as two chimera dinosaurs pass by, Mabelsaurus and Samosaurus. Now, what exact dinosaur they're meant to be is a bit disputed, but some sources claim it's Allosaurus, which I think is a fair enough assumption. Also, for some reason in the Japanese original, Samo says that Mabelsaurus is rather attractive. I don't know how to describe this other than I guess Samo is like a closeted zoophile or something. I don't know, maybe he can go on Leo Convoy's channel. I know he loves those kinds of people, but Mabel points out how Dr. Moreau took their DNA. We then cut to Tiff wandering the jungle with her brother and Kirby, while Tuff asks her what they're doing. Tiff explains that they have to get to the laboratory. Tuff tells her to pause so he can look at his map, but this itself is put on pause when D-Rex comes across them. They wisely choose to hide as it approaches, but it is here that we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, he says it's going to find them. which is fair enough, but the English dub, for some reason, changes this to him saying that he dropped the map they were holding. This is rather odd, as the group has no issues finding the lab despite this, so it just comes off as an unnecessary addition that leads to just a bit of a convenience. In either version, Tiff tells him to be quiet, but to no avail as D-Rex finds them. He, however, gets interrupted by an attack from another chimera dinosaur, Typhosaurus. What exactly it's meant to be is a bit disputed. Given it's smaller than D-Rex and other theropod, based ones, yet larger than a raptor-based one we'll see later, my money is on a Ceratosaurus. Regardless, the two look on as the attack upon D-Rex distracts it. Tough comments on how she has the personality of his sister, which interesting. Typhosaurus bites D-Rex's back as Tough wishes for his own dinosaur. Ironically, he would get his own wish granted when we see the next chimera quote-unquote dinosaur, and I do want to stress many quotes on this so-called Tuffadactyl, as pterosaurs are very much not dinosaurs, but they are instead the sister group to them. So as I stated in my review of part 1, it is very understandable why people back then, and still to a certain extent today, often associate pterosaurs with dinosaurs. There's a good reason for that, as they overlapped in both time and were fairly closely related to one another. Plus, if Dr. Moro can bring back dinosaurs, him bringing back pterosaurs is not that big of a leap, in all honesty. As for what type, well, pterosaurs are a very large group, but judging by his short tail and pop culture awareness levels, it was likely pterodon itself, though Tuff's head shape prevents us from being certain. Tiff then concludes that those needles mosquito drones were sent by Dr. Moreau to take their DNA of everyone. She concludes that they have to go to Dr. Moreau's lab to stop him, as Typhosaurus and Tuffadactyl keep D-Rex busy. However, the two pause in shock as Kirby is gone, and it's revealed that Waddle Dee is led by Captain Waddle Doo, and seemingly under orders from Dr. Moreau, lure Kirby to the lab. Tiff and Tuff chase after him. Meanwhile, we cut to Dee and Escargoon going through the jungle. Escargoon assures him that the lab is around here somewhere, as the king says when he gets his hands on the doctor, he will pay. But then Escargoon points out to the slightly more tribal-looking lab. The D-Rex appears behind them and gives chase. It goes to lunge at them, though with their back against the wall, they manage to hit a hidden door and fall into a nearby trash can. Dr. Moreau humorously greets them and apologizes to them for his dinosaur monsters being such a nuisance. The king is understandably upset at being tricked by Dr. Moreau, and after falling down, pulls out a cartoonish bomb, which worries Escargoon, but Dr. Moreau convinces him to cease his attack as it's a monster factory, and he shows them his lab, which is filled with eggs. We see one hatch as it's revealed to be a baby Escargosaurus, which amazes them, as well as a baby D-Rex that's adorable. The king is astounded at how easy it is, and Dr. Moreau explains that just one DNA sample and they can make an unlimited number of monsters. Apparently, clone degradation just doesn't exist for Dr. Moreau. The king, realizing this would mean he wouldn't need to buy anything from Enemy again, is excited, and Dr. Moreau explains that he'd really like DNA from Kirby, where Escargoon notes the ability to make a whole Dino Star Warrior monster. We see Kirby make his way to the lab, and thanks to the work of the Waddle Dees and Captain Waddle Doo, who causes him to fall down the very trap hole into a specifically designed holder, which is kind of adorable looking and looks like it's made for a baby, which then claps him down as Dr. Moreau pulls out a needle and approaches menacingly. We then cut to Tiff and Tuff arriving at the lab. They try to get in, but the front door is locked. D-Rex shows up and tries to attack them with his tail, which conveniently manages to break the door after they dodge it, and they go into the lab to escape D-Rex. They go down an elevator and run through the laboratory, but pause when Tiff hears a sound coming from the building's kitchen. They go over to investigate as they try to be quiet, but one of them knocks over a ladle, spooking themselves and running into Kawasaki himself. Kawasaki admits that they startled him as he thought they were dinosaurs, and Tiff says the same back as she was startled by him and asks what he is doing in the lab's kitchen. He explains that he used his nose and found his way here. Tiff asks if he's seen Kirby, as Tuff explains that they thought that he would be here, but Kawasaki admits he has no idea and has seen no one here. But they are cut short as another Chimera dinosaur approaches the room. Kawasaki-saurus, or as it's called in Japan, Kawasaki raptor. As you can probably guess, this animal is a hybrid between Kawasaki and a velociraptor, though it must be said that the animal is a lot smaller than the movie Jurassic Park depicted it, and it had feathers, but, it's understandable why these inaccuracies exist, as it is a hybrid between an raptor and whatever the heck Kawasaki is. The beast looks through the window, his breath clouding the glass. It opens the door, scaring the group with its sickle claw. Kawasaki notes it looks a lot like him, while Tiff gives it a name. It chases the group and they flee through the kitchen. It manages to separate Tuff from the others. The poor boy causes it to pause after hitting it with a ladle, but it chases after him. Tiff is worried for her brother's safety, but Chef Kawasaki, using his quick thinking, picks up a container. In the English dub, it is directly referred to as MSG, a direct allusion to episode 34, Recipe for Disaster, which I've reviewed before if you'd like to learn more. Tiff then sprays it with a fire extinguisher. The two kids leave, though Kawasaki pauses as we see the reaction change between versions. In English dub, he mentions before that it was a waste of MSG, while the Japanese original has him feel bad for the creature. Honestly, I think the Japanese version here is actually better, even though it does lack a reference it makes to a previous episode. I think it just makes Kawasaki seem like a nicer person. They take the elevator up to leave, but see the townsfolk being chased by the collected group of Chimera dinosaurs. The crowd enter the building, dodging Escargoon's wrath. Inside, there's a brief respite as Tiff locks the door behind them. Suddenly, an elevator opens up as we see the King, Escargoon, and Kirby showing up. Tiff is happy to see Kirby again, and she says Dr. Moro's experiment with DNA are over, and that she won't let him make a dino monster from Kirby. Escargoon gloats, however, that it's too late, and Dedede introduces Kirby-saurus, the last of the Chimera dinosaurs being revealed. It is also here that we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, when Kirby-saurus growls, it says Kirby when it attacks. The English dub has to just make more generic dinosaur/monster sounds. Kind of a shame because I think it talking made it a lot more creepy. I'm also not even going to try and guess what dinosaur it's meant to be. Kirby's body shape clouds it too much and is frankly absurd. Kirby-saurus is being ridden by Dr. Moro, and he thanks Tiff for helping him create his ultimate creation. Tiff says it's a Kirby-saurus, and Dr. Moro confirms that he used Star Warrior DNA to create the ultimate monster, as he transforms into a monstrous form himself that kind of looks like a homeless guy. Kirby-saurus stomps, causing everyone to flee. Dr. Moro grows out his nails as Kirby-saurus chases after everyone. They escape outside, the small door temporarily hampering Kirby-saurus' chase, but they are surrounded by the other Chimera dinosaurs. Kirby-saurus itself breaks through the wall as Dr. Moro gloats that Kirby-saurus has all the powers of Kirby, but even more powerful. It then begins to suck in as the group barely hold on, with Tiff slowly losing her grasp on Kirby. King, Dedede, and Escargoon laugh, but Midnight shows up and reminds Tiff of the Warp Star as she calls upon Kaboo, who releases the Warp Star, which catches Kirby just in the nick of time. Dedede tosses a torch at Kirby-saurus, who inhales it to undergo a transformation of the sequence of its own, being a demonic rendition of the music seen in the transformation. Dr. Moro, of course, leaps off as he can't really stand on top of a flaming Kirby-saurus. This for some reason confuses Tiff, but Meta Knight points out that it's Fire Kirby-saurus. It breathes fire at Kirby, seeming to be winning, but then King Dedede gets arrogant and, despite Escargoon's warning, tosses a bomb at Kirby-saurus. But Kirby manages to eat it before it can, becoming So this is Crash Kirby, a new copy ability for the anime, which, always nice to see. First showing up in Kirby's Adventure, it was in essence a screen nuke, and up until this point, didn't even have an ability hat. Honestly, I think it looks amazing, this really yellow and spiky black Hamurai helmet with jagged edges and a green jewel that looks like a star thanks to the spines set around it. He also gets a yellowish tinge. Frankly, I love this, and I wish this design had been put in the games. Oh sure, Crash did get a hat in Kirby's Return to Dreamland, which I'll review eventually, being a sort of a Sultan-like vibe, but I just think it's not as cool as this one. Knight explains that this is an ability not seen before. No kidding. Desperate, Dr. Moro orders Kirby-saurus to destroy Kirby, while Dedede and Escargoon back away slowly. It breathes fire, but is of no use as Kirby uses Crash to obliterate the evil Dr. Moro, Kirby-saurus, and stripping the other Chimera dinosaurs to the bone, which must have been very painful. Also, it implies that Kirby-saurus, and by extension Kirby, have no skeleton due to it, not getting one. And Dr. Moreau was just so close to the explosion, he didn't leave anything behind. Staring at the skeletons, Tiff says that she's had enough of science for a while. In the Japanese original, she says they were never meant to be brought back, and Kawasaki comments on how, with these bones, he'll have enough soup for a year. Gus is disgusted, while Kawasaki assures him it's just a joke. Dedede and Escargoon emerge from the rubble that once was Dr. Moreau's lab as he sees the bone and thinks they'd be a great fit for a museum, which he'll charge people to see. Escargoon laughs at the dusty idea and the two bicker. The crowd laughs at the two goobers, and the episode ends with Kirby jumping into the air. Now let us discuss the positives, negatives, and my final thoughts on this episode, the two-parter as a whole, as well as my thoughts on Season 3, now that this is the finale of it. Starting with the positives of the episode, I have to say I thought Dr. Moreau and the Chimera dinosaurs were genuinely one of the best antagonists of the entire series, and frankly, the best antagonists of any of the two-parters. Dr. Moreau, in addition to being a clever allusion to the island of Dr. Moreau in Jurassic Park, was also a genuine monster with his ability to warp science to his own goals. It also uses trickery and intelligence, as opposed to brute force seen in most other monsters. Except for at the end, where it's understandable as he's got everyone at his mercy. The Chimera dinosaurs were another highlight. As you may have noted with these guys, I have mostly stuck to talking about what dinosaurs they're trying to be based off, as opposed to critiquing the scientific inaccuracy. And you may wonder why. Well, for one, unlike in the first episode, none of the dinosaurs in this episode are meant to be actual dinosaurs. Rather, they're, as their name suggests, chimeras. Interestingly, Jurassic World meant to do something similar, but instead we got stuck with Indominus Rex, which is kind of lame. It just looks like an albino malnourished Megaraptorin or Carcharodontosaurid. Now, unlike some people like Scanova, I can understand context and realize that holding these creatures as being representatives of real dinosaurs is kind of stupid. Honestly, I can't help but feel bad for those people, as well as for the Chimera dinosaurs themselves. And I mean, sure, Dr. Moreau is an evil prick, and Kirby-saurus was too dangerous to be allowed to be alive, but the others are mostly just animals, and as shown by those hatched in the lab scene, don't come off as being inherently evil, just able to be controlled by someone evil, like Dr. Moreau. And if you killed him, it seems likely that they would just act like regular animals. I do hope they get remembered in some way, though, given Dedede never made such a museum that we know of. Sadly, their bones likely decayed into oblivion. Maybe Curio took some to his place, but regardless, other positives include Crash Kirby. It's always neat seeing a new copy ability in the anime, even for one as simple as this. I love the design and really wish it had made it into the games in that form. Tiff and Dedede both had pretty solid roles, and seeing the people meet their dinosaur equivalents was neat each time. Now let us go on to the negatives, which there are very few. This time around, for the most part, the changes 4Kids did were harmless or even positive, outside of randomly introducing Tough losing a map. No offense, but it was kind of necessary and comes across as an overcomplication for the overcomplication's sake. And no offense, the implication that Samuel the bartender finds an animal attractive was, kind of weird. Nor do I think of it being the second part of a two-parter really holds it back, as you can enjoy both of these episodes on their own, but we'll return to that in a bit. Rather, my biggest issue is that despite those syringe mosquito drone things getting blood from everyone, we never see dino equivalents of, the mayor's wife, Bookham's wife, Gus, Gengu, Honey, Iroh, Spikehead, Tuggle, or Professor Curio. Meaning we could have had even more show up, but I guess they ran out of budget or time. Now let's discuss this two-parter as a whole, and I have said it before in my past retrospectives, but Fossil Fools is my favorite two-part in the series. Both parts are enjoyable, both on their own merits, but also synergize well into one story, to the point that I will say that if you're going to watch this episode, you really much should watch part 1 as well, which some might see as a negative, but I don't really think so, because part 1 is amazing, and honestly, I'm shocked nobody has ever done like a fan edit where they combined both episodes into one, because I think that would go over well, assuming Nintendo didn't copyright strike you into oblivion, which they've done for a number of my reviews, even though they fall under fair use. Thank you, YouTube! As for Season 3 as a whole, well, I don't think it's as good as the first two, being a slight downgrade from Season 1 and Season 2, arguably the weakest of the show. That's not necessarily due to the episodes being inherently worse. It's because there aren't as many great ones, though there are still a number of good ones, like Enemy Elementary, Snack Attack Part 1 and Part 2, this one I'm talking about right now, Crusade for the Blade, Master 2.0, Fitness Feed, The School Scam, Caterpillar Thriller, and as such, those things. I think it's generally considered weaker due to having more average episodes, as well as having the worst episode in the entire series. But I don't even want to mention it by name. You can watch my review of that. But for anyone who is watching this season, I think you're still going to enjoy it. And, I have to say that this two-part is an absolute must-watch for anyone who's watching the series. Anyway, I'm the Dark Master, and if you liked this video, you liked it, but if you loved it, consider subscribing and sharing it around. Have a wonderful day and take care, and also I'd like to shout out the Museum of Life, which is a really amazing museum that is struggling due to funding issues, and I highly recommend you donating if you like science in any way. Take care, and have a wonderful day.